Hey, what's up, guys? How's it going? Thought I'd kind of talk about mixed rallies a little bit. More specifically, how those reports actually turned out. Because naturally, of course, I took, one rally in range wedge, another rally in inf wedge. As you can see, there's a huge disparity between the two, right? Now, I will point out that both rallies are pretty damn similar, right? It's basically a 4-2-4. Okay. The only difference is one was in wedge, and it was not. Now, I think there's probably some sensible logic that can be driven from this, right? Which is to say that if you go range phalanx, okay, which I think this is the prevailing logic right now, which is that if you know you're getting hit with a mixed rally, rebuild your wall. If it's already broken, then rebuild it. Pop a 1500 gem, pop it, get that fury fire off, and when that rally lands, if you sit in range phalanx, range on range is basically going to piddle in the mud. And because your troops, of course, looking at it from the perspective of what your, where the troops are in relation to what's coming, right? Because something I've noticed with wedges, and I'll show you in a very quick minute what I'm talking about here, but you'll see what I mean here in just a minute. But I mean, it's I don't know how else to really explain it. Let me just show you. That's, honest to God, let me just show you what I'm talking about here. Okay, so for example, range wedge on range phalanx, right? Okay, you're going to see what I'm talking about. All right, if you watch the battle, okay, the wall's up at the start. Naturally, that doesn't last because it falls immediately, right? And as soon as that wall falls, okay, you can already start to see a pattern here, right? You've got infantry coming up, you have cav coming up. Now, what does the cav do? Well, your infantry's right here. You would think it would hit, but it doesn't. And the cav go back and hit the range. This right here is exactly why this did as poorly as it did. Because now I've got cav hitting my range. I've got imp hitting my range. And I've got all these scrappy piece of crap range troops and everything else in the back that nobody cares about that gets completely struck from beneath itself. That's why the wedge isn't working. if it wasn't for that, I think it'd be fine. Now, if you compare that to an inf wedge, same principles, same logic, same everything, right? Okay, you're going to see that more or less the same to be expected here. But now you can see the walls up. Okay, then the first march goes. So a little different, right? Because having the wall versus not having the wall is going to have a huge impact, I think, in part of how these mixed rallies are going to play out. But here you can see my wall was up. And so here we've got two inf marches coming in. And then, of course, they clash with the units up in front of them. And therefore, I think this is really what's determining how well you're actually going to do. I think 99.9% of what is actually happening here is the wall is actually determining at what point those troops clash. And if you have that wall up, you basically prevent the aforementioned issue that you're running into with a 4-2-4. So if you're going in a range fail and you've got, pitiful amounts of range left, then all you've got left going against you is the 4 and the 4, which is your imp and cav. So the range can deal with the cav, and then that just leaves you with the infantry, which obviously with, your existing imp march sitting there and your cav doing all that damage and DPS, you can see why a range phalanx makes a lot of sense here if you're going to be sitting behind the wall. Because that's ultimately going to counter a 4-2-4 really goddamn well. Naturally, though, I think if you wind up in a situation where it's an 8-6-6, this is advice that was given to me from the last video. And honestly, when you look at it from this perspective, it makes a hell of a lot of sense as to why you need to do it this way, okay? I mean, just looking at these reports, you can kind of get an idea of just what exactly is going on here, right? Now, this rally here, you can see it's a range wedge on a cav wedge, okay, and I ended up capping on this, but it's also a one-type blast, and one-type blasts, as you can see, I mean, yeah, I didn't have to. If I had known this, I would have swapped to inf probably, and it would have done much better, but needless to say, I can still cap somebody when going range on a cav wedge, so it doesn't make much of a difference. Of course, I'm not going to talk about all these other rallies because these guys, I mean, the one thing that factors in why is the mixed rally such a popular thing? Well, you're looking at somebody right now that has 800% HP and 800% attack, okay? Anybody that's playing in a ball bracket of 800% HP, if you're wondering, where the heck are you getting that kind of HP from? It's like, well, you got a little over 200% coming out of artifacts. You've got 200% in core just coming out of research, right? You've got 200% in normal mythic champ gear. But if you had tempered, it goes up to as high as, I think, 320 some odd percent. If you go with champ jewels, that's another 90%. Now, you've also got another thing to consider, which is that if you have all infirmaries, well, that's another 80%. So when you tack it all on, it doesn't take very long to get to 900% in terms of HP. And that's with attack, It's like, that is, I think, where a lot of traps are getting confused here. Because, yeah, you're going to get 38.5% in altar. You're going to get your 30% prison boost. But what can a trap account really do against somebody when they're 8 or 900% HP with 800% attack? That is why these mixed rallies, I think, are starting to really perform as well as they are. It's just somebody's picked up on that, has discovered that, but there's not very many accounts running around that have the money, the capital to get to those insanely high levels of percentages where they can really start to fathomably break the way that we've come to understand trapping for the longest time, And so even after all that carnage, it took me like 8 rallies before I was almost close to tapping out. It's like I had like 2 mil across when it was done, and I still didn't lose any T4s. But I can't help but stress the fact that it's like, if you're wanting to do mixed rallies, that's what you need to be striving for. Now, if you're trying to prevent and you're trapping, right, I think the only thing you can do going forward is, I've had suggestions go any different direction. I've had people suggest, oh, we'll just increase your T4 count to 3 mil. I've had people go, oh, we'll just get, the Pack 5 Familiars and get Jade Worm and get that maxed out and then get that added to the wall. Or, I think my other suggestions have been, well, you could do this and do that, and this will improve it, and vice versa. I think it really ultimately comes down to having artifacts. And I think it's the nitty-gritty web that's holding this all together. And I think the gear is the next part of it. It's like, I think if you have comparable gear and comparable artifact stats, you have similar HP and attack as your opponent, that it's going to reduce the amount of losses you inflict. Otherwise, you have to compensate that somewhere else, like troops. So I don't think they're wrong when they're saying, hey, go to 3 mil. It's probably to compensate for that 200, 300, 400% that you don't have. But if you have that 200, 300, 400%, that is how you're able to put up with that crap. And so in a way, I feel like trapping in this game is getting a lot more frustrating when you're dealing with players that are literally, that they're in that top echelon of high-end pay-to-win plays. I mean, you're not going to get any better than that. But it's still getting worse over time, because as IGG continues to add artifacts and more stuff to the game, you're going to have a harder and harder time. So it's in a way, I think the going advice being that, okay, if you know it's a mixed rally, pop your wall and rebuild it. If it isn't already rebuilt, go range fell and pray for the best, I think is really pretty solid advice, given what I've seen so far. But if it's like an 8-6-6, and, obviously if it's not a 4-2-4, then infantry phalanx is probably logical. But obviously everybody always frowns at the idea of going cav wedge or cav phalanx or anything cav, because, well, obviously very few people ever really take the inf march, for that matter. They rarely ever take a full inf blast. I, for one, I'm not really all that bothersome by sitting in cav phalanx against an inf march, for example. That doesn't bother me. A cav wedge, I'm not opposed to it either, right? Because it's just a different march, but naturally you're just sticking whatever you've got out in front, and you're trying to limit your losses. I think really the only downside is if, let's say it's a 6-6-8, for example, right? You've got mostly cav, but you've got some range and some infantry in here, and let's say on a 668, right? I'm thinking, yeah, you can go range wedge. And that 668, if it's coming at you, and let's say, it's a range phalanx and you're in range wedge, I mean, it's tomato, but you're still getting hit with a stupid amount of cav in that bag, with a lot of range to sit there and pucker while the cav are doing all the damage. And so in some ways, more than one, it's like you almost have to get the right phalanx and also have that wall up to be able to really sufficiently deal with it. I think a really large part of that is all because of the wall. I mean, without that wall, you don't have anything blocking it. And you can see when I was showing you earlier, it's like before and after, I think I think there could be more testing that I can see and I can try doing. But I think that wall actually plays a really big part in how this is going to interact. Because as you can see, when that wall goes down, then your troops are not going to react the same way. I really think that's one factor that is actually changing the way this could potentially play out. Because those troops, where they would have normally, I think, collided, they didn't. And so instead of them colliding, they go all the way to the back, and it does the exact opposite of what you would expect them to do, and you wind up losing a lot more troops because of it. And so it could just be because it's a range wedge off of a range phalanx, and that's all the logic there you need for it. Which, if that's the case, then a 4-2-4, just go range phalanx against range phalanx, and you'll be fine, right? Either way, I mean, you kind of get my grief as far as all of the different things that I've come up with so far. But that's what I've learned from this last KvK was. It's definitely something that if you're not paying very close attention to what's going on as far as mixed rallies go, it will come back to sneak up and haunt you. So you've been warned.